Hi everyone, welcome to this video. In this particular video, we will discuss about two very important topics that you should know about if you are a part of information security, cyber security domain. This is essential for you. Data classification and data loss prevention. Two very important terms that all the freshers should know about. Two very important terms that all the experienced people should have a complete understanding around how it works, what is the terminology, why we use them, what are the things involved, what are the things that anybody can ask you in an interview also, like what is a DLP, what is data classification, how do you do data classification, how does a DLP solution works, what are the things that you should keep in mind. So we'll answer all these questions in this particular video as I have industry expert with me. Akshay Dixit is here with me. He's a founder of a company called Anzen Technologies. Akshay, over to you.
Hi, Luv. Thanks for having me. Great session upcoming today. We are here to talk about data classification and data leakage prevention, data loss prevention, as people call it. Short form, quite a well-known term, acronym is DLP. So why are we having this session, and what is the need of essentially data classification and data loss prevention? So let me start off by first saying that for any organization, ultimately, when we're looking at from a cyber security perspective, it is the asset that you're trying to protect, right? We talk about assets, and assets are important for an organization to protect. Now, asset could be of anything that is of value to a company, right? So it could be people, process, and technology in itself. Now, when we talk about information as an asset, data as an asset, what the data that is flowing, the sensitive, the confidential, the restricted type of data that is going inside an organization, how do you protect it? So you protect it from external threats and you protect it from internal threats. Now, most of the time, outside of DLP or data classification or data leakage prevention or data loss even comes in, we're talking about how do I protect this from external. So we put firewall, we do segmentation, we keep the user segment, the data segment away from the outside untrusted zone. So all of these things already happen. But now, what about leakage or threat to your data as an asset from internal, from an internal perspective? This is where data classification and data leakage comes in, where we are saying that an internal actor, a person who is working on the data or is either creating data, accessing data, or sending data within an organization, may be involved in leakage of this data, either intentionally or unintentionally. So the key here is that it may not always be an intentional activity. If there is a malicious actor, if there is a malicious, if there is a disgruntled employee, if somebody from an internal standpoint has the intention of actually leaking a data, that is one. Sometimes, because of some mistyped email address, because of some attaching the wrong file, or just in general putting a document, sensitive document, unintentionally on my desktop, or putting it on a share without an actual malicious intention, I may be involved in aiding to leakage of such a data.
How
But
can it happen, Akshay? Because of negligence of people unknowingly?
yeah, that's what I'm saying. So when I say unintentional, it could be something as simple as a mistake. As you know, I didn't realize I had two documents with almost the same name, and I searched on the alphabet and I kind of attached the wrong document. Or I have two people with kind of a same name, and instead of sending it internally, by mistake, I sent it to an external vendor or external person that was there in my list of people I have contacted. So even though this was unintentional, there was still a data leakage that happened, right? So for all of these internal scenarios, internal threats that come when an organization is dealing with sensitive data, is where we talk about data loss prevention, data leakage prevention, and data classification. So data classification is an important activity. Before diving into DLP, I would like to discuss a little bit about data classification. So that's to say that, the idea is that an internal actor can cause intentional or unintentional leakage of data. But you, as an information security team, has to ensure that no matter what the case, no matter if it's a mistake or if it's an intentional activity, you have to protect your data. Now, the first step in your data protection activity is your data classification. Now, what is data classification? So essentially, data classification is the process of you are categorizing. Data is scattered throughout your network, on endpoints, on servers, here and there. It's on share, it's on it may be in a database. So all of these documents, all of this data is dispersed everywhere. So data classification is essentially the process of categorizing your data based on some criteria that you have predefined. So that one, you can efficiently manage this data, and second, you can efficiently protect this data. So if today you might ask, Akshay, you could go in for a data protection or prevention without data classification. No, a DLP strategy without a robust data classification framework or mechanism in place is bound to fail. So this is a very important key activity here. So we discussed about what is data classification. Now you could come and ask me that, Akshay, why do I need data classification? So one is the protection aspect, right? Just protecting data. There are also compliance and regulatory requirements. When we talk about PCI, when we talk about GDPR, when we talk about HIPAA, all of them require you to classify data in certain aspects. HIPAA might ask you to do it at a PHI level. PCI might ask you to do it at a card holder data level. GDPR might ask you to do it at a PII level. So a classification is required. Now, what classification norms you are following? How do you classify this data? That depends on the kind of business you're running, and that depends on what is your requirement. So that is why data classification is a complicated method. I mean, it involves the aspect of protection as a initiative or as a strategy in itself, and also specific classification based on the regulations or the regulatory standards that you're governed by. So all of this in combine is why you need a data classification. You need to define a proper data classification strategy, and you need to go ahead and categorize and classify all types of data that are present in your infrastructure or network or your system or your organization, to be very specific, right? So then we discussed about, so now you will say that, how, okay, so now I need to do this. I understand the importance. I understand what data classification is. How do I go ahead and do something like this? So very first thing is you need to identify which type of data does actually need classification. What is data to you? What is important data for you? What is not so important data for you? Which are the ones that needs protection? Which are the ones, if leaked, could either cause you financial problem damage, or could cause you reputational damage, or cause affect your business in general, or regulatory non-compliances and fines as well. So you need to identify the need for a data classification. You need to identify what type of data is important to you. What are your data types? Is data stored in your infrastructure as, or in your network or in your system as structured, or is it unstructured as well? Is it dispersed, or is it centrally located? How are people accessing it? So the whole data point understanding, also how data is flowing within your organization. You have to understand which people are accessing which kind of data. So the data flow, where a simple question would be, where is your data stored? What type of data do you have? So you could say that, Akshay, I have data in the form of Excel sheets. I have data in the form of databases. I have data in the form of PDFs. I have data in the form of Word. I have data in the form of TXT. I have data in the form of EPUB. I have data in the form of RTF. I have data in the form of XML. I have data in the form of JSON. So wherever and however you are storing the data, you have to first identify it. That is the key, because we can't move ahead until we do that. And this is where an activity called as data discovery comes in. This is an activity of using both manual and automated approach to discover whatever data is spread in your entire infrastructure. So this, first you need to answer these questions for yourself. You know, where, so you understood where your data is. Now, where is my sensitive data? Who is accessing my sensitive data? What are the modes of transportation? How is data sitting in storage? How is data being transmitted? So when you understand, then you know which points to protect. For example, you could say that actually it is getting stored on shared drives, and the only means of communication of data is email. Or you could say there is a shared drive and people copy paste. You could say that, you know, people are inserting USB and taking data. So you have to identify the things that are there first. Once you identify what type of data is there, wherever the data is there, what is my sensitive data, how is my data flowing, then you can go ahead and identify the types of controls for protection. This is a data leakage prevention strategy. Not even talking about DLP solutions yet, even before that. So just to say, so we will talk about it. So just to say that, you know, these are the pre-questions or the pre-activity questions that you need to answer yourself. You need to get answers to this, and then you go ahead and do data discovery. Right? So what is the advantage of classification is that once you have your data classified, then you can properly govern all type of data. For example, a data protection. So now, as an example, you might say, actually, okay, now give me some examples of data classification. So within an organization, let's keep regulatory things aside. I may say that, you know, this is my financial data. This is my HR data. This is my R&D, this is my research, this is my intellectual property. This is one form of classification. Then all documentations you would categorize into whether this is could be accessible by public. You could give it a tag. Then the data tagging also comes in place. Now when you are doing data discovery and then you discover the data, what do you do then? Once you have discovered all data, you've classified it, now you tag the data with some tag. You could say that, you know, this is a public data, accessible to public, it's okay. This is private, to be known to certain people. This is sensitive, this is confidential. Some people go on and make super sensitive classification, level 1, level 2, level 3. That is all on you. So there is no specific way of doing it. You need to first understand your business. You need to first understand what kind of data you're consuming, what kind of data you're processing, what kind of data you're transmitting. Basis on that, you tag the data. Now extra tags when regulatory compliances comes in would be that this is this type of data is my PII, this type of data is my PHI, this document holds PII data, this document holds PHI data, this document. So then you could go ahead and process security controls on the regulatory aspect as well.
Akshay, I have a follow-up question on this one, the data classification part. Yes. Like just asking from a fresher's point of view.
Sure.
Couldn't it be a case where we have identified all the assets? Once the asset identification is done, all the data which is incoming as well as outgoing through that assets, we can actually, you know, only consider that particular data because we are only talking about assets. Can we do that?
Could you repeat the question again?
Let's say I have identified the critical assets in my organization, right?
Okay.
And all the data which is incoming as well as outgoing through those assets, I only, you know, consider, because again at the end of the day I have to only protect the assets, right? Can I relate those two things? I was just thinking.
Here, Love, the idea is that the data in itself is an asset for you. When we're talking about risk management, we say that asset is of anything that is of value. So asset as a server is one thing, but here if somebody asks you, okay, Love, I have my asset is my person, my employees, my servers, and my data. So the data aspect protection, data as an asset protection is where data classification and data leakage prevention framework or data loss prevention frameworks come in.
Now I've understood it, because now let
Yeah.
me just clarify it for other people who are watching. Now we are considering data, information itself as an asset, right?
Yes, yes, very much so,
Absolutely.
and that's a
Okay.
huge and very very good that you brought this point up, because as practitioners we have a habit of identifying a server as an asset only,
Yeah,
like
absolutely,
a
absolutely.
desktop as
Yeah,
an asset. So we
yeah.
always think in those ways. But from a risk management or an information security perspective, if you look at it, anything that is of value to an organization is an asset,
Yes, absolutely.
right?
Great.
So here data becomes the asset.
Right, right.
Now we say, okay, now what are the types of data classification? Because I'm saying this because when you read about this, you will get this. And if I don't cover this, this will come up as a question either today or tomorrow when people see this video. Is basically we talk about content based classification and context based classification. So when we say, so what is content and what is context? So just to give you and if we go into the DLP architecture and how content and context base goes, then this would be like a 2-hour thing. So just explaining this for people, the curious people out there. So when I say content, I mean the exact keyword. What are you looking for? The exact content becomes the okay. I can't explain content with saying content. Is the keyword, the letter, the word, the thing that denotes a certain type of a data becomes a content-based classification. For example, when we are talking about PII, so we know what PII is. We know the name, address, all of these things. So this becomes content-based classification, where I know how to classify based on the type of content that a document has, right? Context is basically to say like anything other than the content becomes the context. For example, who was the creator? Who was the author? Who is this document meant for? The context of it. Was this created, for example, if I make a presentation for senior management talking about internal sales and revenues. Now I delivered that presentation. Now I have to share this document with the senior management. Now the content based classification says that since it has financial figures, company revenue, that becomes a content based. But Akshay, as a senior manager, created this for the senior management CXOs, for their eyes only, to be only consumed by CXOs and nobody else, is the context. Who is the creator and who is the consumer? So any document that is to be consumed for, and this is just one example, that any document that is to be consumed by this specific set of people who deal with very sensitive data is a context based classification.
So can I say that it's type of a filter that we are putting in terms of classify it as a contextual base, right?
Yeah, so both. So an effective data classification incorporates both content and context. Now,
Okay.
usually when a company starts with data, so data classification, Love, is a continuous process. You have to understand that, you established a methodology, and as your company, so maybe today you do not need a context. Let's say you have a linear structure wherein everybody is at the same position. Startups especially work in that way, right? So everything is shared with everybody. So in that sense, you may not require that much of a context, but later on, as your company grows, hierarchy and structure grows, you might want to introduce structure, context based classification as well. So your even any framework keeps on maturing over time. Even your data classification and data leakage prevention framework or data loss prevention framework also matures over time. So you start off with something, with whatever you have, because let's say today I'm dealing with X amount of data. I can't say that for the next 10 years I'll be dealing with. What if my company acquires another company which has a whole different set of unstructured data, and they are dealing with a different industry altogether, and I'm consuming it? So now I have to go through and how I put a data classification on them and kind of incorporate that data classification into my classification. I have to map all the data taggings. So all of this is a continuous process. That is to say, not to confuse anybody, you start off with analyzing how much of a content based. Mostly in most organizations, the heavier portion is the content based, because I need to make sure, for example, if there is an internal IP address in a document, that should not be leaked outside the organization. So this is a content. You're understanding that what IP address is, and you're making sure it does not go outside, as an example, right? So this is the major difference between content based and context based. Now there is also a concept of user based classification, is basically heavily just on user, but I kind of keep so as in, if you want to differentiate, you could also say that, you know, also analyzing in a document, there is just a content, but what if you are also analyzing metadata? What if you are also looking at the file type? You're going in deeper. So like I said, anything other than content becomes a context. So some people differentiate this user and context. I like to keep it in the way that just depends. So don't feel that, you know, this is something I did not cover. uh, then again, what we're talking about is which type of classification method do I use? Now a very simple question is, you know, which type of classification method do I use? So I, as a practitioner, what I would say is that, you know, it's a mix, it's a hybrid, it's a remix. The type of data that you're using will entirely depend on what is your need of data classification. For example, if you are not under a regulatory compliance, if you are going for an ISO audit and an ISO audit requires you to have a data classification mechanism in place, that's it. So in that case, you could just go in for public, private, sensitive data, and then you could just classify it, right? If you're actually facing data leakage, because it does happen. I mean, I will not believe somebody who says that, you know, there is zero data leakage happening inside my company. That just essentially means that either your framework is not robust or your detection and monitoring mechanisms are not in place. Because I mean, human mistakes, human errors are so common when we are talking about an organization from a larger perspective, that these things keep happening. So this is you could want to protect your intellectual property. You could want to do it for compliance purposes. You may have across different organizations, different functions, have a development team, you may have a service model, then you may have a financial team. So a lot of data is mixing here and there, people are exchanging data, and you just want some governance over this, because you can't leave it in a disarrayed manner, because then you can't control it. This is the importance of data classification. And a lot of times people go ahead and implement DLP solutions without a proper data classification strategy, and this is where it fails. Believe me, man, without a good data classification. So spend more time on data classification, data discovery, and then once you are sure that you have everything covered, like for example, the crown jewels, the sensitive information, all the data has been tagged, all the data discovery has been done. After that, you should go ahead and, you know, talk about implementing rules inside a DLP solution.
Okay, so Akshay, can I summarize it and let me know if I am summarizing it properly? For in order to classify, you know, the data classification process, number one should be to define the objective. As you rightly mentioned, they need to understand what is the objective behind data classification process, right? They need to do
Right.
that. Second thing is to create workflows based upon the selected classification that they have done, right?
Yes, the data flow. How is the data flowing? That's true.
Right. And,
That's true.
and third thing is defining the categories and classification criteria. What is it that they are
Yes.
using,
The
right?
classification criteria is key, Love. What is your reason to, and state all the reasons, because that
Right.
will help justify your classifiers.
Right. And fourth, last but not the least, to define outcomes and usage of the classified data that they have actually classified now. Can I say that? In these four steps, can I
Yes,
summarize it?
yes,
Okay.
yes, very much so.
Okay.
Now, an important thing or an important question that comes in people's mind is, okay, you explained everything. Now, who are the people who are involved in this data classification activity? So typically, this would be, needless to say, your CIO and CIO's team are an integral part of data classification strategy, because he is the chief information officer. He's the guy who's dealing with information. So his team is the team which has a key stake in defining, because they are the people responsible for running IT operations. They are the people who the CISO typically reports to the CIO. So the second actor would be the CISO, who makes sure after in the data classification he has inputs of security, and after the data classification he has the proper controls in place for securing the data. right?
Akshay,
Then yeah.
Vinod is asking a follow-up question. Vinod is saying, can you please give an example for data defining? How to classify this?
Yeah, so like I just said that, you could say that if you're dealing with consumer data, so what are the personally identifiable information that is there? If you're dealing with healthcare data, what are the PHIs? If you're dealing with card data, what is the card holder data? If you're dealing with intellectual property R&D, what are the keywords? If you're making softwares, what is your code? How is your source code different from a normal manual document that you are sharing, right? So this is how you define it through keywords. You're saying, okay, this is sensitive, this is source code, this is PII, this is PHI. So you do first data discovery, you find all types of data, then you do data tagging, is where you tag each and every kind of data based on the keywords. And this is how, even as a human, if I'm doing data loss monitoring and prevention, I would be able to recognize, or even a solution which you are going to implement will also recognize in the same way.
Yeah, Vinod has also have another follow-up question. Now he's saying how an L1 person will be able to understand this concept of given or shared data, whether it is secured or not.
I'm sorry, can you just
Yeah,
I
sure.
didn't
So
get the
he's
question.
asking for a person who is at L1 level, how can he understand the concept of shared data being secured or not? Because
Okay.
yeah, he's at L1.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, so L1 level person is first of all just a part. I may be a part of the whole data classification activity. Data classification is usually done by senior people who have understanding of how data is flowing. They need to then follow and understand what data classification is being currently followed in my organization. So the data classification policy would typically be uploaded on your intranet, and you will have a sense of what this type of information means. And then you can look for either tags, or you can look for the nature, or you can look for the type of classification which is associated. The responsibility of there should be a security awareness in place. But when we talk about data classification and data leakage monitoring and prevention, that is not the responsibility of an L1 person. Obviously from an employee perspective, I am responsible for the type of data, but you are not responsible for securing the data. This is the whole strategy. So you might be a part of the DLP team, you might be a part of the infosec team, but the strategy is not where you come in. The strategy is defined by managers, senior managers. Yeah. So for example, you could say that, public, private, and restricted. So what type of your job postings, your flyers, banners, all of that could come under your public type of documentation, which is acceptable for public use without some restriction. One classification could be private, which documents should not be distributed externally. Okay to be shared internally, not okay to be shared externally, becomes private. Restricted, even within this private or an inside organization, this is restricted use for your eyes only, or for specific type of people. These are usually the type of data that come under compliances. Like we say, need to know basis. Whoever does not need to know about a PII or a PHI or a financial information should not be allowed to use it. So that kind of tagging restricted is kind of for that. To give an example. Right. I guess we have covered pretty much from data classification perspective.
Classification standpoint, I have another follow-up question, Akshay, on data classification. So I would like to clarify it, here and at the same time only, so that we do not have to address them later, because now you are in that flow, right, for data classification. So
Sure.
Chitranshu Jain is saying information written on physical papers, can it also be considered in data classification? If yes, then how to apply DLP on it?
Okay, very good question and a very practical question. I believe Chitranshu may be a part of this or facing something like this. So this is a question, yes, faced by a lot of people. So Chitranshu, what happens is when we are doing data classification, and when we have done it for our clients as well, our clients come to us and they ask us that, yes, Akshay, there is this whole bunch of pieces of paper that I have, which is a documented thing inside a locker, and it is secured. So now the question comes is whether from a DLP perspective, I'm not even going for solution. Let's just talk about data loss prevention as a concept. And one important thing I wanted to say, and I'll say it again, I stopped before, but I want to say this, is that everybody should always think of DLP as a framework and not as a solution. The problem with industry right now is, as soon as I say DLP, a product vendor will come in your mind, and that should not happen. DLP is a framework. So Chitranshu has an excellent question. What he's saying is, if you're talking about physical paper, if you're talking about data written on physical paper, how would you do it? So typically, Chitranshu, the activity when we're doing data discovery, we do digitization of these documents. So you might want to go for digitization, meaning scanning and uploading and then converting it into a portable readable format, purging the physical copy, so on and so forth, or locking it in a storage facility, and then a person physically is monitoring, or there is a surveillance camera that is looking. You're protecting that information through biometrics is how you are securing or ensuring data loss prevention. So the physical control, I said, once you identify the data, you have to identify the types of controls. So physical security as a control is applicable to the data which is on paper. I hope that answers your question. Okay, should I move to DLP now?
Yes, of course, Akshay. Thank you.
So now, so once you've done data classification, now you want to secure the data, you've put all the controls. I'm not going to discuss the controls for data protection, because asset protection, server protection, we've already discussed. If there are some specific questions, we can then take it up later, because this is very specifically for DLP, and I'm looking at the time, and time is going by. So I just need to make sure I cover the topics at least at a basic level so that everybody understands. Now, your problem statement as a manager, as a practitioner, or as a CISO is, Akshay, I did the data classification. Now I want to make sure that this data does not get leaked, either by some malicious actor or by anybody by mistake. This is where data loss prevention or data leakage prevention comes in. Again, I keep saying both of these things because a lot of people call it as DLP, as data loss prevention. I personally like to call it data leakage prevention, because the leakage is the aspect, there's a loss, but leakage gives a sense of alarm or a deeper sense. But then that's just my opinion. So don't hate me for preferring leakage over loss. That's on you. Okay.
Actually,
so now, yeah.
Chitranshu is saying thank you so much. Clear. I am absolutely clear now. So thank you.
Awesome, man. And great question, by the way. Huh? So what is basically data loss prevention? So essentially, a major part of data loss prevention we just discussed: data classification, data discovery. All of these are actual part of your data loss prevention methodology or the establishment of your framework. The reason I put specific emphasis is because I wanted people to get out of their solution zone. In the first 10 minutes, I have to get them out of that zone, and then I have to explain it to them again, is that the data classification, data discovery, data tagging are part of the DLP implementation. Again, I am saying this is not a solution implementation. This is a DLP framework implementation. Please, folks, if you take one thing from today, is that never think of DLP as a DLP solution, because when you approach it from a solution-based approach, then that's not the right way to go. There are solutions which will enable your framework. So make a robust framework and choose the best solution that fits the framework and all your needs. Instill security in that way, rather than saying what the DLP has and now whatever solution they are saying and I will implement that over there. That's a reversed approach, and that's not it's not a proactive way to security. So why we keep saying is that data classification and DLP is a proactive way of approaching it. A lot of people come and say that, I have all of it protected, Akshay. It's there on the servers. I have protected the servers, that multi-factor authentication. What if somebody by mistake sends an email? How do you protect that? You can't, because everything else was covered. But how do you detect that? So that is where your DLP strategy comes in. Right. So your identity, basically, it is to say three major parts that come in: discover, monitor, and protect. So discover is a continuous process of scanning or looking through each and every asset, each and every nook and corner, network, devices, shares, endpoint, servers, for what type of data is there, then what is the sensitive data, and how do you classify it and tag the data. Then monitor is based on the rules. After you have done the data classification, you define specific rules. Now, what is that rule to say? What type of action to do when a certain type of data is accessed or sent, or there is an attempt made to leak it in a certain way. These are the rules that you define, right? For example, you could say that as soon as somebody tries to send a document that has internal IP addresses mentioned on it, that email should not go out. Now, this is your requirement. Now, all I need to do is I need to make a rule out of it. If document category equal to internal IP, then block email. This is a rule. Now, when I have a solution, I will just configure this rule inside the solution and I'm done. You see how we did it. We first went through the data discovery, we went through the data tagging classification, then we took the requirement and we converted it into a rule, and we just configured the rule inside the DLP and we are golden. So this is the importance now. And then
I think just to reiterate that whole point, they have to understand the process and the approach to DLP rather than just simply buying a solution, right?
Yes. Because a solution, you will get that vendor on board. They will tell you everything. They will configure. They will help you configure. You can have SMEs configure it for you. But if your strategy in your mind is not clear, then that becomes an issue for you.
So for all the CISOs who are watching, for all the information security managers who are watching, take this as a big takeaway. Do not go for a POC without understanding your own organizational requirements. That is the key here. That is what Akshay is trying to repeat every time here. If you are watching this video, you are a CISO, you are a CIO, you are an information security manager, this is a big key for you. Create your own requirements document first, create your own process document first. What do you need to have in place? That is the key here, rather than going and calling for a vendor for a POC, because that anybody can do, of course. Go ahead, Akshay.
Yeah. So very, very well said, Luv. So the idea here is that you need to and I'll tell you, Luv, why this is also essential. You made a very good point before moving further, because we have already touched this, that if you don't have the classification in place, if you take a vendor to just implement it and without a classification in place, it will become a problem. If you hire a consulting firm much like ours to help you in the data classification and discovery process, it will still take some time. And what we always say is, if you already have something in place, it becomes easier for us.
Yes.
We could do something from scratch. It's not a problem. But if you've already spent some time, if you can at least explain to me what is the type of data which is important for you, then I can go ahead with that. So the more understanding you have of your data flow, right? So I mean, if you come to me and say, I don't have any classification, I don't have any data flow diagram, I have nothing, so then I will have to sit with your person to actually make a data flow diagram. And that is why when somebody without a proper security posture or a data from an asset protection in mind comes, DLP project implementation takes years to completely get operational.
Right
from the idea of beginning or me engaging with you, it takes 6 months, 8 months, about a year to fully get the confidence, depending on the scale. Obviously, we're talking about a larger scale here. For a smaller scale, it takes, as I said, time. And vendors would have you believe that the solution will be deployed within a matter of 5 days, and then you can just configure the rule in the next 5 days, and then and that's not true. That's just them saying that they'll just put something over there, do their job, and then go. But for you, it has to be an effective framework.
Approach. Yeah, absolutely agree. Akshay, I have a follow-up question here. Vishal Mohite is here with me. Welcome, Vishal, to the group. He's asking, may I know the difference between data loss and data leakage, and are they both same? He's asking.
So Vishal, again, as I was saying, so there's no, you could find something if you probably Google it. A little bit, there will be somebody who's differentiating data loss and data leakage. Essentially, you're saying if data goes outside of the authorized people who are supposed to access, It's data loss. Data loss is more towards unintentional, and data leakage is more connotation towards intentional. But today, in today's terms, data loss and data leakage are used together to just denote like, I could say, leakage of data, either from intentional or unintentional. So it's pretty much the same thing to say that you've lost your data, or somebody could say the availability is gone, but I don't believe in that. What I am saying essentially is that the data leakage should not go outside. So that's why I use data leakage, but then data loss prevention is also the right word. So yes, pretty much the same annotation when we're talking about this.
Yeah.
Maybe
So
from a dictionary point of view, it may be a different term.
yeah, so we shall try to understand what Akshay is saying is the analogy is the same, which you are trying to come to a point. The end goal is same here. Okay, so that's what Akshay is trying to mention. Akshay, after that we have Prakash Thakur. Prakash again is a returning, live stream member who is a part of the game now. Welcome, Prakash, to the group. And Prakash is saying, what about a disgruntled employee? Now he is asking.
Exactly. So that is where we started, Prakash, that internal threat in itself of a great value. And I believe we were also discussing this when we were talking about zero trust, is that it's no more the time where we are saying that just the only threat to me is an external. A disgruntled employee could very much try to steal sensitive information and try to either send it outside or try to sell it out. So that is a real problem. That's an actual problem as organizations face. And that is why we talk about data leakage prevention and data loss prevention strategies.
Akshay, do we call this thing only the insider threat?
Yeah, because the person who would typically have access to it, but is now using that privilege for some malicious purpose. Typically, they should only send it over here, but they're trying to send it to. So, you must have heard about cases, Love, where internal employees after resignation try to copy the internal documents to and send it to their personal email ID, or try to upload it to their Google Drive. This is an example of violation of data leakage prevention rule or framework. And this is what gets monitored, detected, and